You're listening to the July 29th, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. The Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, here again with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. On this podcast, every week we bring you the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions based on Surfwatch Labs data and analysis. So I'll jump right into it with the most talked about cybercrime event this week.
Yeah, for the second week in a row, we're going to talk about the Democratic National Convention. We're going to talk about the hack, so just to catch everyone up, WikiLeaks, tongue twister there, they released some emails that were from the Democratic National Committee. Some negative things came out of that, but here we have some more updated information. The most recent update with that is that intelligence officials have high confidence, and that's a direct quote, that the recent hack and subsequent leak of emails and documents from the Democratic National Committee, they're tied to the Russian government. The New York Times reported this on Tuesday. The incident has created political turmoil leading into this week's party's convention, including the resignation of DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who publicly released the emails, has made clear his intention to influence the U.S. presidential election. Officials said the motivations of the alleged Russian hackers remain unclear. And getting back to the WikiLeaks founder, I think he actually admitted that he wanted to hurt Hillary Clinton with the release of those emails.
I think he did an interview with CNN, and he said that Clinton is one of the main U.S. officials pushing to punish him for releasing the hundreds of thousands of diplomatic cables stolen by Chelsea Manning during Clinton's tenure at the State Department. So
okay,
there's a little history there. You know, there was that huge leak that caused all that political stuff a few years back. And according to him, at least, Clinton wants to prosecute him for that. And he's obviously not a fan of Clinton, so it makes sense that he doesn't want to see her become president.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually saw a lot of memes. I'm friends with a lot of people that they're never Trump, never Hillary, a lot of Bernie or bust people. And one of the things they keep saying, because Julian Assange said that he has a lot more material that he could release. Well, a lot of people are making the argument, well, if you have all this material, that this week was the time to release that. You wanted to make Hillary Clinton look as bad as possible to maybe take the nomination out of her hands. Unless he truly, just wants Donald Trump in office. You know what I mean?
Well, you could argue...
Because you could have had a different candidate, maybe.
Yeah. Well, if they have material that is going to be detrimental to the Clinton campaign and you release it kind of incrementally, keep the story going all the way through the election. I don't know necessarily what they have, though, because they released the... just on Wednesday, during the convention, they released a bunch of voicemails that were obtained in the hack. And from the reports I read, there was a few, I wouldn't really necessarily call them incriminating, but there was a few cases of donors calling about, getting favors for their donations and things like that. But the reports I read, it was mostly innocuous voicemails, nothing really too crazy there. So, I don't know if he's just got more stuff like that to leak or if there's actually going to be something big.
Right. And then the other thing with, if this hack is tied to the Russian government, Donald Trump, he kind of, very loose cannon, just comes out and says things. He was kind of encouraging the cyber espionage by the Russian government. He's later come back and said that he was just kidding. But that's pretty interesting, a presidential candidate encouraging hacking, especially in a case like this.
Yeah, he really knows how to dominate the headlines. I went on Twitter this morning. I go on Twitter every morning and kind of search for a few different keywords to try to find all the cybercrime news. And I would say 90 to 95% of all the top tweets that were coming up in the search were all about Donald Trump and the whole Russian thing. I was actually thinking, though, this could really be a historical election because maybe on the state and local level there's been cases like this, but this could really be the first presidential election whose outcome could hinge on a cyber attack.
Right.
Obviously there's a lot of factors at play here, but if say Trump were to win the election and it was a close call, I mean, you could say that the president of the United States was decided based on those couple of swing votes potentially from all this. You know, you got all the email security stuff, you got all the DNC hack, you got whatever Julian Assange says he's got coming next. So
yeah, I mean, for the longest time, Hillary, even though, I mean, the unfavorables for both candidates are historically high, but Hillary was still leading in all the polls up until recently, and that kind of coincides with the hack. So that's interesting. We'll have to see.
That was the big story, like we said, all over the news, media, anything politically related is obviously going to be trending pretty high this time of year. Another big story, though, that kind of fits into, I think we're talking a little bit on the last podcast as well, all this credential reuse and all these different companies being victims of old credentials that are out there. Well, another company was in news this week, the UK telecom company O2. They were in the news because some of their customer data appeared on the dark web. And the interesting thing here, like I said, is that they put out a statement. They said that we have not suffered a data breach. They went on to blame the data that was on the dark web as a result of credential stuffing. So credential stuffing is where you use these automated tools. You take the list of old credentials and you just keep trying, all these automated attacks to see which accounts hit. And obviously a certain percentage of those hit, and they were able to then get into customer accounts and steal more customer data. Names, email addresses, dates of birth, things like that. And so this attack is actually being credited, if you want to call it that, to the a November 2013 breach at gaming website XSplit. So back then, I believe it was like 2 million credentials that were stolen in this XSplit gaming website attack. And now, 3 years later, those same credentials are being reused to lead to another breach. If you want to call it a breach or what you want to call it, but customer data was exposed because of the reuse of those credentials. So just another company to add to the growing list of all these credential reuse attacks.
Yeah, and when Surfwatch Labs, when we went through and we typed up our first half of 2016 report, that was one of the main themes, password reuse. When we looked at LinkedIn, which was one of the top trending targets throughout that time, that was in large part, if you look at all the damage that was done from password reuse, from LinkedIn, and they were able to use these credentials to, it just keeps going. It's a continuous hack.
And the really interesting thing about that is LinkedIn the breach was 2002, and then 4 years later we're having these things. This XSplit breach was November 2013, so you're talking 3 years later. So it's not even just recent attacks, but you're talking about attacks from 3-4 years ago that are now leading companies to get their names in the news for current data breaches.
Yeah, and it's a problem that's not we talk about it. Cybersecurity experts talk about it, but whenever you see like a company release a statement, you don't see them mention that very much. And that's why I was actually really impressed with our number 3 target, Shapeways. They released a statement, I'll get to that in a second, that kind of covered password reuse. But to get into Shapeways, they're a 3D printing company, and they experienced a data breach. So in this breach, customer usernames, shipping and email addresses, and hashed passwords were all compromised in the breach. The company did release the statement that I wanted to talk about the hack. They did note that no credit card information was obtained, which is good, and here's what they had to say. Although Shapeways protects users' passwords with a hash in an effort to prevent malicious attackers from misusing it, to err on the side of caution, Shapeways is suggesting that users reset their passwords, which is a pretty standard response. But then they went a step further. If users use their Shapeways password on other sites, Shapeways is also recommending resetting the password for those sites as well, and not to reuse their Shapeways password on other sites. And that was the end of the statement. And that's great. That shows that with all the talking that we do, at least we get to see an example where like a company's like, oh yeah, you wanna, maybe it's our opportunity. We have an opportunity here to be like, hey, we can protect this other company. Change your password over there too if you use it over here.
Good on them for doing that, but I just wonder, with all the stuff people read and stuff people see, how many people whose accounts were compromised just kind of glaze over that, or even if they read it, they just don't want to be inconvenienced by, understandably, having 80 different passwords for 80 different sites.
Totally agree with that. I mean, that's a whole other problem. I thought it was neat to actually see a company address that in their statement about a breach.
I guess coming back to trends from 2016 and late 2015, we've talked about hotel breaches happening pretty frequently in the second half of 2015 and then again first half of 2016. While our number 4 target is Kimpton Hotels, Brian Krebs wrote a blog saying that they are investigating a possible data breach affecting multiple locations. According to Brian Krebs, 3 different financial industry sources confirmed a pattern of fraud that suggested a potential breach affecting 24 Kimpton hotels. According to the article, Kimpton operates 62 properties in the United States, and Krebs notified the company on July 22nd after he heard from these sources of his, and then they issued a pretty standard breach investigation statement this week, just basically saying that they're aware of the unauthorized charges, that they immediately launched an investigation, engaged a security firm, and they're committed to swiftly resolving this matter. Another hotel to add to the list of point-of-sale breaches.
Yeah, and coming in at number 5, we have a Korean online store known as Interpark Corporation. They were hacked. A hacker was able to successfully obtain and leak the information of more than 10 million customers from Interpark Corporation. A hacker was able to compromise its server back in May 2016. The customer data that was leaked includes names, addresses, and phone numbers. Law enforcement believes the hacker sent an email that contained malicious code to penetrate the server's defenses. So that was when the news initially broke. In today's headlines, during an investigation into this breach, South Korea has reported that North Korea is behind the attack. Even more shockingly, they say North Korea is attempting to blackmail the online retailer, asking for 3 billion won, which breaks down to about $2.66 million. So that kind of adds a interesting spin on it. North Korea has certainly kind of picked on South Korea in the past.
Yeah, and I was reading an article just before we started recording, and in that article it said that shares for the company have fallen 6% already since the news of the data breach broke on Monday.
Wow.
So,
yeah,
they'll probably bounce back. That wraps up the week's top trending events. Now we'll move on to some of the advisories that made headlines this week. One of the big ones that I saw that was pretty interesting to me is LastPass. They were in the news. Anytime there's a password manager in the news, I always find that pretty interesting. There was a newly discovered vulnerability in the popular password manager LastPass. And a couple days ago, Travis Ormandy, he's a security researcher, he put out some, I guess, cryptic tweets basically saying, there's these problems in LastPass. Who's using this LastPass program? And so all the media outlets started reporting on it. And I believe just today or the day before, LastPass actually put out a statement about it. It turns out that the problem was with the Firefox add-on. And according to LastPass, they said that an attacker would need to successfully lure a LastPass user to a malicious website. Once there, Ormandy demonstrated that the website could then execute LastPass actions in the background without the user's knowledge, such as deleting items, and through that manipulating the browser and executing LastPass actions, they could steal passwords and get a bunch of different stuff. So they said that the issue has been fully addressed, and an update with a fix was pushed for all Firefox users using LastPass 4.0. So if you use LastPass and you use Firefox, definitely should be aware of that and make sure that vulnerability is taken care of.
It's got to be a small group of people to use both, though. LastPass and Firefox over like Google Chrome, you know what I mean?
Well, Firefox is pretty popular.
It is.
I'm not sure what the latest numbers are, but yeah, it's kind of scary. I'm always sad when I see things like this in the news because it's one of the things that I always push and a lot of people push is, we were just talking about, password reuse is such a huge problem. So we tell people, just get a password manager and you'll be safe. But you can never be 100% safe. But so when you get stuff like this in the news, then you get a lot of maybe knee-jerk people saying, well, see, you can't use that either. So
Right. I still personally recommend it, though. Coming in number 2, we're going to talk about Amazon Silk web browser. There's a flaw with it. Security researchers have discovered an SSL flaw in Amazon Silk web browser for the company's Kindle Fire tablets, which affects me, and Fire phones. Silk allows users to utilize whatever search engine they wish. If they decide to use Google, that's where this problem has been discovered. If Kindle users use Google, Silk prevents redirection to the HTTPS version of the website, which allows hackers to launch a man-in-the-middle attack and intercept the victim's search traffic. Now with this, Amazon has patched the vulnerability. They got a little bit of flack for it because they didn't really tell you when they patched the vulnerability. Like, people had to, like, a lot of these security companies had to kind of, like, oh, I guess you guys took care of this, okay. So the key thing here is make sure that you have the latest version of Silk, which is version 51.2.1.
Oh, yeah, and then moving on to the number 3 trending advisory. We talk a lot on this podcast and, everywhere in cybersecurity about the different cybersecurity standards. And NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, they made some headlines the past couple days because they put out some updated standards on two-factor authentication. Basically, the gist of it is that they are going to discourage people from using SMS-based two-factor authentication and adopt more secure methods in place of that SMS, like one-time text message you get to your smartphone or whatever. So this recommendation comes from a draft of the updated digital authentication guideline. So if you want to know more about that, you can just go to the NIST website and look for the digital authentication guideline. They have a draft of it up. They're asking for comments on it. So it's not complete yet. But in that guideline, they asked those considering adopting two-factor authentication to, quote, consider alternative authenticators. And they even have a part in there, they say that out-of-band authentication using SMS is deprecated and will no longer be allowed in future releases of this guidance. So they recommend, other two-factor options like, Google has the Google Authenticator where it's not a text message that can get intercepted, or there's physical devices you can have, USB or some kind of dongle that you need in order to authenticate.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting story because typically we promote the idea of using, two-factor, and we'll say we don't really get into the type of two-factor authentication you're using. We're saying, oh, it's a good idea to use two-factor authentication. Yeah, it's good to use two-factor, but, you got to kind of watch out for how you go about it.
Yeah, well, we've seen different malware and different campaigns that are able to circumvent two-factor authentication, or usually a lot of times socially engineer people into handing over their code that they have. Or, there's different ways where they can intercept or, reroute the text message to a different number, things like that. So,
our next advisory for the week, we have something that's been dubbed the key sniffer flaw. So this new flaw, again nicknamed key sniffer, has been discussed heavily in media this week due to its ability to log and inject keystrokes on wireless keyboards. The flaw affects wireless keyboards from the following companies: Anker, EagleTech, General Electric, Hewlett-Packard, Insignia, Kensington, Radio Shack, which Jeff and I kind of joked about. We didn't know that Radio Shack had their own brand of wireless keyboard, and Toshiba. Security researchers are calling this flaw a, quote, mouse jack on steroids. And maybe if you listened before, I think we have talked about the mouse jack vulnerability. Key sniffer is very similar to mouse jack, but instead of pairing a rogue device, such as a rogue mouse or keyboard like mouse jack does, Key Sniffer allows a hacker to snoop on the data exchanged between the wireless keyboard and the user's USB dongle. This can be a huge problem since the wireless keyboards at risk exchange data in clear text, which allows a hacker not only see the data, but they can also inject their own keystrokes into the data stream. So it's something to be mindful of. That potentially could be a big deal.
Yeah, and I saw a whole lot of articles going around Twitter and social media. A lot of people talking about this flaw. So it seems to be at least making the headlines and getting some people concerned. And then the last advisory, we have a banking Trojan, Thonic. So this new banking Trojan has been spotted and is being distributed through emails sent through PayPal's official email address. And the emails have a link that redirects users to a website that distributes this Trojan. And it's a newer variant of the notorious Zeus banking Trojan, which Zeus just seems to kind of resurface and be repurposed for a whole variety of different pieces of malware and Trojans and such. So far, the malicious URL has only been accessed about 30 times, so it's not incredibly popular at the moment. But what is troubling about this particular attack, and the reason that we're bringing it up, is that it is the whole social engineering aspect involved with the attack. Since they're sending the email from a legitimate source, it really makes detecting malicious activity difficult, especially, for the average person. Even if they're looking a little bit, they may be suspicious about it. They see, oh yeah, it is legitimate PayPal.
Right.
And then they click the link and end up getting infected because of it.
Tricky people out there. Tricky. Moving on to trending settlements, lawsuits, and legal news. Jeff always does such a fantastic job in this section. Our first bit of news, and I actually saw this. This was interesting. Anyone out there have Bitcoin? Well, it turns out Bitcoin, when you think like digital currency, there's a court that said it's not real money. Jeff, do you want to kind of fill us in on what's going on with that?
Yeah, the aspect of this story that really caught my eye is, well, obviously, Bitcoin, we talk about it all the time from, I guess, the negative side of things with cybercrime and the dark web and things like that. So anytime we see Bitcoin, we're always interested to see how that plays out. But on Monday, a Miami judge basically said that Bitcoin is not real money. And the reason this ruling came about is because there was a person who had been charged with illegally transmitting $1,500 worth of Bitcoins by selling them to investigators. So it sounded to me like the investigators are kind of basically trying to set this guy up, get him to, I don't want to necessarily use the word entrap because isn't that a bad thing? But yeah, they're basically trying to catch this guy performing some illegal activities. So these investigators were purchasing Bitcoin from this guy. Then they went back and purchased some more. And then they told him that, hey, we're going to use this to buy some stolen credit card information. Apparently in Florida, the law says that an individual can be charged with money laundering if they engage in an activity that will promote illegal activity. So that's what this guy was charged with, basically selling the Bitcoin to this other party who was then going to use it for buying stolen credit card information, even though they were just posing as investigators. They weren't really going to do that. Well, anyways, the judge found that law was too vague to apply to Bitcoin. She said the court is unwilling to punish a man for selling his property to another when his actions fall under a statute that is so vaguely written that even legal professionals have difficulty finding a singular meaning. And then the thing that's getting all the headlines is she basically declared Bitcoin as not real currency. Instead, it's like property as opposed to currency.
Looking at the people behind Bitcoin and maybe like the Bitcoin professionals or experts, so what do they think of this?
Yeah, the articles I read, the Miami Herald, they had a pretty good article about it, and the Guardian, a lot of people picked it up. They all seemed very pleased with this ruling because the ruling will make it easier for those, particularly those in Florida, because it was a Florida court, will make it easier for those people to send Bitcoin with fewer regulatory hurdles. That's what Charles Evans, he's an associate professor of finance and economics at Barry University, and he actually testified in the case. He said that this ruling is going to make it easier to send Bitcoin because there's going to be fewer regulatory hurdles because it's not really considered, it's not money, you're just basically trading property.
Okay.
Back and forth. And so it's not really clear, I guess, what the ramifications of this ruling will be. Like I said, it's just one Florida court. But there hasn't really been a lot of Bitcoin-related rulings, so that's why everyone's talking about it and everyone's interested in it. And, now that we've kind of got this setup in Florida where lawmakers may want to decide that they need to pass a law or something related to Bitcoin, right, so that in the future they potentially could charge someone doing that. And, it could potentially spark other people or create other ideas for governments or people to try to implement if they're worried about, Bitcoin being used in this way.
Interesting, yeah. And because Bitcoin, is still a pretty new thing, yeah, that's interesting that determination was made. We'll have to see how that all plays out. What comes of that lawsuit-wise and things like that on the legal side. Coming at number 2, we're going to talk about Target. It's been a while since we've talked about Target, so we might as well bring it back up in news. A derivative lawsuit against Target's board members and executives has been dismissed based on the recommendations of Target's Special Litigation Committee, or SLC. The lawsuits were filed by shareholders following Target's 2013 point-of-sale breach. And under Minnesota law, Target formed a 2-person SLC to investigate the claims. After a 21-month investigation, the SLC's 91-page report concluded that it would not be in the best interest of Target to pursue the claims against the directors and officers named in the lawsuit. Earlier this month, a federal judge followed that recommendation and dismissed the case. Although Target joins a growing list of cybersecurity derivative lawsuits that have been dismissed, derivative lawsuits still pose financial and legal risks for companies. This was noted by the National Law Review. In small cases, SLC costs can range from $300,000 to $500,000, while more complex investigations can exceed over $1 million. Furthermore, unlike Target, not all companies will withstand the judicial scrutiny of their cybersecurity practices. Surely there will be future derivative suits based on deficient processes that do not warrant dismissal, leading to significant litigation costs.
I guess the first time derivative lawsuits came into my consciousness was with this Target breach, where the shareholders are actually filing a lawsuit against the board of directors and the officers, basically that they caused or didn't do their job to prevent the breach. But the crazy thing here is a 21-month investigation, and if you read about it, they interviewed I think it said 68 people. They did all these things. It's just crazy to consider. They spent 2 years basically just coming up with a recommendation that, it's not in our best interest.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's funny. Then moving on, we have another HIPAA settlement. This is the number 3 trending legal news item. The University of Mississippi Medical Center has agreed to a $2.75 million HIPAA settlement. I think on the last podcast we talked about a different HIPAA settlement that was right around the same amount. I think it was 2.7, 2.8 million. So when I saw this, I was like, wait, it's like deja vu. But it's actually different. So the University of Mississippi Medical Center, this $2.75 million HIPAA settlement that they reached has to do with a breach of electronic protected health information back in March 2013. So in March 2013, a password-protected laptop was stolen from the medical center. This laptop allowed access to the protected health information of about 10,000 patients. And this is a quote from OCR. They put out a press release on it. They said that their investigation revealed that the electronic protected health information stored on the University of Mississippi Medical Center network drive was vulnerable to unauthorized access via UMMC's wireless network because users could access an Active Directory containing 67,000 files after entering a generic username and password. So once again, it all comes down to credentials.
Right.
They had a generic username and password that you could plug in to get to 67,000 different files, and 10,000 of those files had electronic protected health information in there. So now they're paying $2.75 million.
Yep. Coming in number 4, we're going to talk about Minnesota County, and we're going to talk about a settlement payment that they agreed to. And the settlement payment is $1 million. And this settlement was announced earlier this month between Mille Lacs County and Minnesota and residents who had their personal information accessed by Mickey Joe Peterick, who's a former child support investigator for the Mille Lacs County Department of Family Services. Peterick accessed the personal information of over 260 county residents 605 times between January 2009 and November 2012. One attorney told Legal Newsline that the settlement was rare as class actions for privacy violations and data breaches are typically brought against entities with deeper pockets, such as retailers, which makes a lot of sense. We were just talking about a lot of these huge companies, they get big fines. That's a pretty big settlement for something like that. I mean,
because it was only 260 residents, I believe.
Yes, right, right.
So I didn't do the math completely, but I think they're each going to be getting a couple $1,000.
Yeah,
sounds like
that's a heck of a settlement, actually.
Yeah. And then the last story here. This one, kind of funny, kind of strange to me. I always like ending, the legal news with kind of the interesting arrest/sentencing of the week. And this week, a former Citibank employee was sentenced to 21 months in prison. His name is Lennon Ray Brown. And in addition to the 21-month prison sentence, he was ordered to pay $77,000 in restitution. And this comes after pleading guilty to intentionally damaging a Citibank computer. So what happened here was this Lennon Ray Brown, he had a meeting with his supervisor about his work performance. I wasn't clear in the press release whether he was actually fired in that or he just got the impression that he was going to get fired in the future. But he didn't leave that meeting too happy, and he decided to then use some code to erase the configuration files in 9 of Citibank's global control center routers. And this led to a loss in connectivity to approximately 90% of all Citibank networks in North America.
Wow.
So good for him. He got back at his boss, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Now, the funny thing here is it didn't sound like he was too concerned about what he did. He even sent a text message, which now ended up in the official Department of Justice press release and everything. So be careful who you text, kids. He texted one of his colleagues, "They was firing me. I just beat them to it. Nothing personal. The upper management need to see what the guys on the floor is capable of doing, and when they keep getting mistreated. I took one for the team." So, yeah, he took one for the team, 21 months in prison, $77,000.
Yeah, I don't think I would be willing to go to jail.
Yeah, I don't know if he was
fired from a job, but
yeah, if you're ever angry, count back from 10 and then ask, should I do this?
Or hit a pillow.
Or hit a
pillow. Keep a pillow with you at all times.
Well, that wraps up the top trending events, advisories, and legal actions from the past week. Now moving on, we'll have our funny story of the week from Matt.
I don't know, Jeff. I thought that last story was kind of funny, but this one's pretty good too. Today we're going to talk about Vine comedian turned pop rap star Jack Johnson. You ever heard of Jack Johnson?
I've never heard of a Vine comedian turned pop rap star.
Well, he's a popular guy apparently. Johnson is one of the biggest stars on the internet with millions of followers. So with his popularity, people are going to worship the very ground he walks on and do whatever he says. This was put to the test last week after Johnson posted a tweet asking his followers for their Twitter passwords. Now, looking at this, you would probably guess that, there's going to be a few idiots that are going to comply with his request, and everyone else is going to laugh it off. Well, that wasn't the case here, as tens of thousands of people obliged Johnson and tweeted their Twitter passwords to him. Plain text, everyone could see it. The stunt was dubbed #HackedByJohnson. Fans all over the world thought by sending their password they could be part of a personalized video that would pop up in their accounts. So Johnson was saying, here's some of your password, I'll make a video, I'll go on your account and post it for you.
But they didn't just send it to him, they publicly tweeted it to everybody?
Yes, correct.
Smart people.
That is correct.
That wraps up this week's Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup. The Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs helps organizations and service providers quickly establish a strategic cyber threat intelligence operation that drives more effective use of their tactical defenses. For interviews with cyber experts, check out Surfwatch Labs' other podcast, The Cyber Chat. And for more information on cyber threat intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.